Hi, friends. Thank you for being here with me once again. Today, I had a request to paint some magnolias, which are absolutely beautiful. I don't see them too often out here. I wish I saw them more. They are absolutely beautiful. So I noticed a couple things about them. If you notice here, gosh, I don't know if you can see this well. Sorry for that reflection. One of the things I noticed is they've got pretty thick brown stems. And one thing really noticeable in all of these magnolia flowers are the petals are very flowy. They kind of twist and turn, and I think that's really fun. So we're going to paint some of these. See these petals, how they twist. And I'm going to try and make this as easy as I can. I don't remember who asked for these, but magnolias can be a little bit challenging. Here's another type of magnolia in this beautiful botanical book that I was gifted. And so they've got quite big leaves. They've got quite large leaves with green, with browns. And the leaves again, the petals again are kind of twisty. So I think that's really fun. And many times when you're painting, go for what you see. You want to get that general shape that is going to be characteristic of whatever flower it is you're painting. Not necessarily, for me, my type of painting and how I teach, I don't go for, the photograph look. I go for kind of what I see and feel. So this was my practice magnolia that I came up with, and I'm going to be sharing with you today. I think the purple and the green are absolutely beautiful. They're very much complementary colors, and I put a little bit of the burnt umber and burnt sienna in there in these branches. And I even put a tiny little taste of, I believe that's cerulean in there, and I thought that was really pretty too. So in case too, I after these paintings we do together, I list my painting, my pre-work, which I'm going to show you right now, is a little swatch of the colors I like to do. I will do some brush strokes. So you get this whole little package, and I'm listing these for $25 on my Etsy site, but I think they're such great reference, and they also are a great little keepsake because you got to see me paint these. So here's one, for instance, that we did. This was in my tutorial on YouTube, Little Spring Florals. And then here's the pre-work I do that kind of shows the different strokes, and my swatches, which would also give you guys the colors that I used. So kind of a fun little package here. I put it in a nice little sleeve for you. You actually get the original painting that you saw me paint, and some descriptions of some of the brush strokes that we used, and that's $25 on Etsy. So option for you there that might help you, and I think is kind of fun. So let's start out with doing our swatch. So I really like this color, which is that Quin Magenta. So let's just put that on a swatch here. I do this always so I can get a feeling for the colors I'm going to use. So I'm going to use in here the Quin Magenta, a little bit of that cerulean, and of course green, some greens for the branches. So let's start with our magenta. Now remembering when you paint, always paint light, your lightest layers. You can always darken up by adding layers to your paintings. You can't, it's pretty hard to go light. You almost can't. Today I am using my Princeton number 8 Velvet Touch round brush. All these links to any of these products are in my description. I'm working on getting affiliate links, but we'll get there. So that's the brush I'm using. Today I actually am using some pretty decent paper. This is 140 pound Arches cold press, so it's got that little bit of texture. And this is just a 140 pound cold press, but it's a student grade. So this is just what I'm going to do my practice strokes on. And then always keep scraps of your paper. These are perfect for swatches. If you notice, that's what I do all my swatches on. So these are handy. So let's go ahead and do the swatch here. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll do very dark value, which means there's a lot of paint. Then I will add some water and I will get a lighter hue of that. So I can see all the different color variations I'm able to get. So in here is a lot more paint. Up in here, it's very transparent, washy. So I like to kind of play with that first. So there you go. More paint, darker value, and as I continue to add water and pull the paint, it gets lighter. So I'm basically using that color for everything. Here's the cerulean blue. Now I would just be using little touches of that. So there won't be a whole lot, but when I do these swatches, you can kind of see the colors, how beautiful they are together. That's just adding some water, so you see how you get lighter here, because in watercolors, I don't typically use white. I just add more water. And then our green is going to be Winsor Newton Sap, excuse me, and olive green. So this first green that I'm going to be using is that olive green. And then to give the different plants some variety, I will do some of them with a lesser value. So that gives you the dark leaves, more paint, darker value is going to enable the leaf to look closer up. The more water and paler, less in value the hue is, it's going to look more in the background. Okay, so practice that. And then let's go in with, gosh, I got a frog in my throat. Our burnt umber and our burnt sienna. And that will be for the branches. Now, I also mix that a bit with some of the green, so I get this beautiful blend here where the leaves are coming out from the branch like so. So you get these really pretty wet in wet. So I took my wet paint into wet paint that was on my paper, and you get these beautiful mixes of colors that you can't not get out of a tube. So I really like working that way. So these are those colors. Now to get a little bit darker brown, I might just take a tiny bit of my Payne's Gray and add a tiny bit of that in if I want to darken up a part of my branch. So there you see how pretty that is. Now I'm going to rinse my brush, just scrape it a bit and dry it a little bit on my little paper towel here. So I think that's pretty much all the colors that I've got in here. I've got my leaves and stem. I've got most of my flower will be this beautiful color that you see. These are the ones I've seen around here are this flower right here, this type of color. I've also seen some of this Magnolia, but where it's a lot of white and pinkish in it. So that's what I'm going for. And then these different variations for the stem. So there you go. I do, when I make this a little cute little package for you to practice from and kind of a good resource, what you'll get is my actual painting I'm going to do. If I did any pre-drawings, you would get those, and then you'll get this swatch. I'll list the colors, and we're also going to go through the brush strokes right now. So the first brush strokes that you're going to use in this painting are going to be, let's just use a green here, the thinner brush strokes, which will be, you know, some of these leaves and branches. And that's the first thing I'm going to be painting. So just to do a practice sheet using the tip of your brush, and normally I would hold my brush quite a bit upright, but I don't want to block my painting so you can't see. So I'm going to hold mine a little bit to the side. I'm resting my arm on my paper, and I will be moving my entire arm. So very light pressure using the tip. We're going to do these branch strokes. Now, honestly, the Magnolia is a little bit thicker, as we talked about. So you're going to put just a little bit more pressure on your brush so you can get that wider stroke. So pressing in a little bit. This is a great practice for you. Do pages and pages of these so you can see what it takes to get the different strokes, maybe practice from top to bottom. So that's basically going to be the branch stroke that we're using. I might add a little brown into that. So I might go back into that wet paint and add that. Then for the leaves, we're going to use the side of our brush so we can get these thicker leaves here. And I'm going to show you that right now. So for your leaves, and actually the petals too, but for the leaves, magnolias have quite thick or wide leaves. So we're going to point, press using the side of our brush. So see this big, fat, thick line I get? There you go. That's using the side of our brush. Okay, so you're pushing into the belly. So let's do that a few more times. And then you could tap into this to add some color. So point using the side of our brush. And do it again. Point, press. And the magnolias I've seen, they even have a tad bit of pinkish or reddish around the edges. So you can add that in if you want while this is wet. So this is wet into wet. I might even add in a little bit of pink around those edges. And I think that's kind of interesting there. So for your petal strokes, you're going to use the same side of your brush as you did with these, but they're going to be a little bit longer. So your petals are going to be point, press. Now my brush is a little dry there, so that's why it's doing that. Like so. You're going to do point, press, and for the other side, point, press, and widen out the belly of your brush. Let's try that a few more times. Point, press. And you could actually, that could be a petal right there, just one side. Point, press, and then lift up. So this is very, to me, reminds me of the leaves of that magnolia that's getting ready to bloom. Now, you don't want all the petals to be the same color, so I would rinse my brush, scrape it on the edge of my water, and then just tap it and go in and make some more petals here. kind of in the background. Now notice I am preserving some of these white spaces. Very important. I talk about that a lot, to leave these white spaces. It makes for a really interesting flower here. So there you go. Practice some of these strokes. So point, press, and down. So there, you've got a petal right there. Let's try that again. Point, press, and down. That is a perfect petal. Point, press, and down. Leaving white space in between there. This is the practice sheet you will get, and I will write on here. Point, press, point, and leaving white space. I put all these little notes in this sheet you get, okay? So hopefully that helps you and kind of reminds you of when we went through this tutorial. And then the last thing I might do is maybe have you practice a little bit adding in. So if we go in right now with our green paint, you can add in here, just tapping with the tip of the brush, like so. So just kind of practicing how this comes together here. Okay, I'm just using the tip of my brush, and I'm also going to add in some brown. While this is wet, I'm just going to go into a little bit of that brown that I mixed. It actually even has some green in it, which is perfect to get this really fun color. And I might just tap into that. Just some little taps, and let the paint do its thing. Okay, so look at how beautiful that is already. And this is just the practice sheet. So there you go. We could even practice one of these petals. Point, press. Now that I've kind of used up all the paint and everything on there. Point, press, point, press for these beautiful leaves. Put a little more green on there. Point, press. Use the side of your brush. And the other side, point, press. There you go. Isn't that gorgeous? You could even make these leaves thicker, because these magnolia leaves are quite hefty. So let's make a couple more thicker branches, thicker leaves. Point, press, and the other side. Something like that. Now look how beautiful that is, because I mixed my brush with green and brown, and I didn't quite fully mix it. I basically went into the green, I went into the brown, so I've got a good mix of color on there. Look at how beautiful that turns out. Okay, so this is what we'll be doing. Now here's that point that you practice up above. You'll have all these little branches coming off with maybe some more blooms, so just practicing those. Maybe make that into a leaf. Point, press, you get a little more water. Point, press, point, press. Just play with these, okay? So let's go ahead and get started on our painting. And I tried to pick the easier poses, easier angles with these, because I just thought that might be better. So we're going to go ahead and first use our Quin Magenta. I have all these colors with links, and letting you know what colors I used in my description as well. They're on my little swatch. I will name the colors. So let's go into our first petal. Let's make it up above here. So point, press, just like so. Point, press, just like so, leaving that white space. Okay. I'm going to rinse my brush a bit so I get a little bit different color. Point, press. Okay, see the white space here? Point, press. Lots of white space, and I'm using these different colors, so there's this push and pull. Now what I noticed is in the center of a lot of these magnolias, they start out pretty vibrant. So I'm going to tap into, scrape off that magenta and just touch here while it's wet. Okay, just like that. Okay, so let's add maybe a couple more little leaves, petals coming out of here. Point, press. I noticed one of those characteristics again of this flower is they get some twisty and really beautiful petals coming out. I'm going to add another one in the background here. Point, press, leaving that white space. Point, press, just some more petals in the background here, and their petals are quite long, so point, press, let's make them a little bit longer there. There you go. Rinsing my brush off, washing my brush. Okay, now while this is wet, I want to go into it with the stem. So I'm going to grab rinse my brush and go in and grab a little bit of that burnt sienna and that burnt umber and mix that. I might add a tiny bit of that, not too much. Okay, and let's go in and create that branch, which can be quite thick actually. So I'm going to make that thick, and we're going to have branches coming off in all different directions here. So there we go. I'm going to go back and add a little green into that. So let's do that. Just tapping because it's wet. And then let's do, they kind of have these things like so. There you go. So using a lot of the side of my brush, okay? All right, so let's do another flower over here. Let's do a bud. So going into my magenta, and we're going to do a small little bud here. So let's point, press, and then just the tip of our brush. Okay, and that's really about it. Now let's go into that, rinse and dab your paper towel, and go in with the green. I'm going to use those browns, and maybe just add in a tiny bit of green. That was really kind of too much. Okay, scrape that off, and let's go into this. There we go. And they're quite thick right in there. Okay. So there you go. There's your little bud. I'm going to rinse. And now I think I want to add in a few leaves. So I'm just going to grab my olive and my sap green. And remember, you're always starting lighter because you can always go darker with layers. So we want to get the more watery consistency, and then just scrape off some of the extra. And let's go in and just add some leaves. So remember how we did the leaves. It's point, press. Now my brush is awfully dry. Point, press. And the other side, point, press. Okay, there you go. You could even make this leaf tapping in with some dark there around the edges. We can even make that leaf bigger. Point, press, using the side of my brush, point, press. And like so, going in with a little bit of that brown, because I'm kind of liking that. I think that's really interesting, and tapping in. There you go. And now how about one off of here? Point, press. Okay, so when you see that, you need more water. Point, press. There you go. Go in, tap while it's wet with some of that darker, just to give some interest here. Okay. And look at how beautifully these are blending. So let's make another flower right here. By the way, if you noticed possibly, I meant to show this to you when I started, what you can do is you have different choices when you're painting, especially if you're using student grade paper, it might tend to warp a little. So you can use Scotch tape, good old Scotch tape or painter's tape, and just tape your page down. That way, if your paper gets wet, it won't start buckling. And the other kind of cool thing is when this dries and you remove the tape very nice and slowly, you get this beautiful white edge around your painting. So that's kind of cool too. Now, there's another type of paper you can use, and it's called the block. It's a block, what they call it. I actually have that in my links, and all the papers are sealed. Let me see if I can find my block. And this is Legion paper, but it's also, I also have Arches. So it's sealed on every edge and it holds your paper so your paper does not warp. And you just have an opening here and you can slide a credit card or your fingernail in there when you're all done and the painting's dry, and just take that sheet off. So that's another way. But when I started out, I always taped my paintings down and it kind of held them there. So back to our painting. We're going to do this flower here. So go ahead and wet your brush, just barely scrape it off. Let's pick up more of that pink, and I'm going to try and go somewhat light with it. Let's see. And let's make a petal here. So the same brush stroke, point, side of your brush, and come down. You might wash your brush off a tiny bit. Point, press, keeping these white spaces in the bottom. Point, press, side of your brush. I'm at a weird angle, so kind of hard for me to get that side of my brush. And point, press. Now I'm going to add in a couple of those kind of funky leaves, petals that I've seen come out, like so. Maybe one over here. And to me, that very much is identifiable as a magnolia. And then I'm going to, with my brush, pick up some of that Quin Magenta and just tap into these areas. And while it's still wet, as you see, you get this beautiful spread that I think is so easy to identify these flowers. Now, while it's wet, I want to go in and put my branch in and let the colors mix. So we're going in here like this. There you go. And that's going to mix. That's quite a bit of brown, so I'm going to rinse my brush here and add in some green because I think that'll be really pretty. Look at how beautiful that is. And these are all with that one stroke. This stroke right here where you point, press the side of the brush. Very fun. You can do this if you practice this. Let's go in here and add maybe another somewhat opening bud. Actually, let's create a big leaf here while this is wet. So I'm going to pick up my olive and sap green that I mixed here. Make sure it's got plenty of water. And let's add in a couple of these big leaves. Point, press. Now again, my brush is a little dry. Point, press, point, press, and make this big fat leaf, leaving some white spaces and going back in with a little bit of that brown, just for some interest around the edges of the leaf. Now I'm going to rinse my brush, and let's make another leaf over here. So point, press, point, press. There we go. Isn't that lovely? Okay. And then when I'm done, I'm going to make one more little flower getting ready to open here. We'll go back in and add a few more of these little leaves. Okay. Look how pretty that is. Okay, so let's do one more bud here. Now this one, I'm going to try and make it a little bit more open and maybe facing this way. So point, press. It's going to be smaller. Point, press, like so. And then maybe you could see the back here. A few more, point, press, like that. And then while it's wet, let's go in with dipping into that Quin Magenta and just tapping while it's wet and letting the paint do its thing. Isn't that beautiful? And also while it's wet, I'm going to clean my brush and pick up some of that brown green. And I'm going to go into it like this. Just smaller versions of that point and press. Okay, look at how beautiful that is. Now we're going to fill this with a few more leaves. So let's go back into that green, olive green and sap green. Going to add a little bit more water. And let's add in some more leaves. So, oh, you can't see that one. Okay, let's go, the bottom of my paper goes below the screen here. So point, press, point, press. Now you can see my brush is dry. So I'm using some really good paper today, folks. That's why it's really soaking up. This is Arches Rough, which is very absorbent. I'm going to go in and add some of that brown around the edges. There you go. Let's put a little lighter leaf in the background here. Point, press, point, press. Now, as you can see, because I used a lot more water, that leaf is much lighter and it looks like it's in the background, right? Isn't that great? This is the beauty of magic color, of watercolor right here. Now I'm going to touch in the little bit of that dark, but I don't want it to get the same value as this one because I want it to look like it's in the back. So let's go even a little bit fainter and see if we can get a petal. Let's see, maybe coming out here. Point, press, point, press. Look at that. I feel like I want to add one right in here. So some more of that green. I want to go a little bit lighter, so I'm adding some more water. And you can always use your practice sheet to kind of see what the value is of the paint you're using. Point, press, point, press. So there you go. Isn't that pretty? Maybe, because I noticed these magnolias have a lot of branches on them. I'm sorry, a lot of leaves on them. So I'm trying to kind of continue that. So how about right here, we do a light 1-point press that's kind of in the background, a little bit smaller. So there you go. Now you could even keep going, put one back here. There's a lot of these magnolias, when they're really blooming, they will get tons of these little blossoms coming off. So you could certainly do that and just keep adding on. Use a little bit of my Quin Magenta, side of my brush. And now some of that brown that I mixed with the green, burnt sienna and burnt umber, a little bit of green in there. And let's just touch while this is still dry, like that. So you could really go as much as you would like. But I think this is good. I think this is really pretty. And this was all done with that one brush stroke. That brush stroke of point, press for the leaves. And for the flower, you could actually just, you don't even have to add in that other side. Point, press, there you go. Point, press, and then leaving these white spaces. Point, press, point, press, like this. Okay, and then remembering to go into these wet spaces with a lot more of that paint and just touching and letting it spread. Last thing you're going to do on those flowers is just add in your brown stem. Okay? Well, I hope that helped. You know, please ask if you would like this wonderful little package to go out to you, that you actually get a painting, which I normally sell for a lot more. But what a great little practice sheet. And I will write down on here the different brush strokes and my little color swatch. If I ever do any pencil drawings, I'll give that to you. But try this out and see what you think. I hope to hear back from you, and thank you so much for your suggestions and you know, requests. I love them. My little palette is from Mist Ceramics. You can find her on Instagram. She's made all my palettes. She's also made all my little cups and things. So there we go. I hope you try this out, and thank you so much for being with me here as I'm growing and learning this video stuff. Let me know if you could see things well, and I think this is just really lovely. Okay, everybody, thank you so much, friends. We'll talk to you soon.